Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here with another video in my Cuba Libre tutorial series, and this one is just about terminology from the rulebook. So if you want to see a general overview of the game, that is going to be the top video on the playlist. This is probably going to be the second one. And the goal here is to get y'all familiar with some of the common terms from the rulebook. So when you're looking at rules or when I'm talking about rules in future videos, you have a general idea of what I'm talking about. So the first thing I want to do is a map overview. There are 3 kinds of spaces on this map, and I want to make sure that you know what they are and how to find key information about them. Kind of the basic thing on the map is the provinces. So here you can see Cuba divided into all these different provinces. We've got Pinar del Rio, La Habana, Matanzas, Las Villas, Camagüey, Oriente, and Sierra Maestra. And these provinces are going to have basic information about them that's printed on the board that I'm going to just show you how to interpret right now. So one of the things that you're going to always want to be paying attention to with provinces is the population. So if you look in each province near its name, you're going to see a little square with a number inside, and that number is going to be either 1 or 2. So that number is the population of the province, and it's going to be used to calculate things like resources and victory conditions during various phases of this game. So you're definitely going to want to know where to find that information. The other thing that each province is going to have are the little boxes. The one on the left is going to tell you who is in control of that province, if anyone. And the box on the right is going to tell you whether this area supports the government, supports the opposition, or is kind of somewhere in the middle. So for example, Pinar del Rio is controlled by the syndicate and it has active support for the government. Meanwhile, Matanzas is uncontrolled. Nobody controls it right now, and we're going to talk about what that means in a moment. But they have passive opposition to the government. And you'll be able to find this information for each of the provinces, and it's going to differ depending on the game state. And you're going to be manipulating it depending on which faction you play. The other thing to notice about the provinces is that see how they are different colors and have different prints on them? That is because these different background colors represent different types of terrain. So these darker green provinces are forest, these lighter green provinces are grassland, and these brown provinces are mountains. And there are going to be certain aspects of the game where your landscape type in the province matters. So here's the key in case you forget, but be sensitive to that information as I describe the rules, because there will be little differences in certain aspects of the game depending on what kind of landscape you're entering into when you contest a province. Then you'll notice that set against these provinces, you have these various circles. There are 2 kinds of circle on the board, so I'm going to talk to you about them right now. So the bigger circles, these ones with kind of this bluish background, these are cities. There are 3 cities in the game. You've got Havana, you've got Camagüey. So note there's a Camagüey province and a Camagüey city. They are different. And you also have Santiago de Cuba, which is the 3rd city on the map. So the cities are very similar to provinces in that they have a population. So Havana has a huge population up here at 6. Camagüey has 1, Santiago de Cuba has 1. And again, it's a number that is in a box, like a square. The other thing that cities have, just like provinces, is basically control and support markers. So you have government control and active support in Havana, and actually the government controls all the cities in the starting game state, but with differing levels of support. So at a glance, you're going to be able to see who controls cities, where the political support is right now. And they're kind of these slightly different spaces that are aside from the provinces. And then there's a 3rd kind of space that doesn't have any population at all, but it's very important in terms of generating resources. Those are called economic centers or ECs. So there are 3 ECs on the map. There's also a key that's going to make sure that you know what they look like. And the numbers here are actually their economic value, so 332. These areas do not have populations, and they are truly there as economic centers. You cultivate and put pieces in and mess with them in order to impact the resources that other players can get. So that's just a quick overview. 3 types of spaces on the board: provinces, cities, economic centers, or ECs as they're referred to in the rules. I also want to review some different terminology as regards the forces on the board. So anybody's pieces, they're troops and their police and their guerrillas and their bases can all generally be referred to as forces in the rulebook. So forces just means people's pieces that they're using to solidify control, fight, move around, and entrench themselves. The government is the one that has the most unique types of force. So the dark blue cubes are troops, the light blue cubes are police, and then these are bases. All of the other factions are considered insurgent factions, and they have these little cylinders. These are all called guerrillas, and they all have an underground side where nothing is showing on the top of the cylinder, and an activated side where a symbol is showing on the top of the cylinder. So for the syndicate, you're going to see coins, cha-ching, but for everybody else, you're going to see stars. So this is activated, this is underground. The other term you're going to see a lot is available forces. Available forces are forces that are in these boxes. So it'll actually say available forces for whatever faction. So when you are told to take something from available forces, that doesn't mean forces that are on the map. It means forces that are in the box. Once you run out of forces in your box, like if you deployed everything, then you can start redeploying your pieces to other parts of the map from where they were. But typically you're going to be doing it from here. And there are also some rules for bases. So these bases are going to be really crucial to your victory conditions and to getting control of spaces on the map. You're going to want to build them. But while you can pretty much put any number of your guerrillas or troops or police officers into any area, you are limited in terms of how many bases you can place. So there's a rule in here called stacking that's going to come up a few times in the rulebook. So there are placement limits for bases. Basically, you cannot have more than 2 non-casino bases in the same province plus 2 casinos. So the maximum in any province is 4 discs. So let's say that we're here in Pinar del Rio. We can have 1 more casino if we wanted to. Let's say it's open. Let's make money. And then we can have 2 other bases from a combination of all 3 factions. So let's say that the Directorio gets 1 here and the government gets 1 here. This is now maxed out. According to stacking, you cannot have more than 2 casinos and 2 bases from any other faction. So the hard limit is 4. There are some event cards that can change that. So, look out for the Sinatra event card, hint, hint. But when they say within stacking, this is your limit. So make sure that you're being attentive to that when you start to try to take over this board. I also want to discuss resources, especially resources versus aid. So when you are told to spend resources, what you're spending is basically the value represented by these cylinders on this resource track. So this track keeps track of a lot of different stuff. Your victory conditions are tracked up here. So basically every time support changes, you need to change total support. Every time opposition and basis changes, you need to adjust this marker, possibly both of these if you've had a switch from support to opposition. Every time you open a casino, you need to track that up here as the syndicate. And the same thing for the Directorio. As you gain population and bases, you're supposed to track this in real time as the game state changes so that everybody has a visual of what's going on and how close people are getting to their victory conditions. Additionally, you're going to want to be checking on these cylinders. These are your resources. So wherever your cylinder is, those are the resources that you have to spend, flat out. However, there's also an aid token here that starts on 15. You want to pay attention to the aid token. You cannot spend it like money. However, where the aid tracker is affects how many new resources the government gets during a propaganda round, where if nobody's won the game yet, you do have a resource phase and you generate some income. So aid is not money, not straight up anyway. Aid is going to tell you how much money the government is going to get basically from the United States when you all do your resource income at a future point. There's also cash, which can kind of stand in for resources and can generate resources. I'm going to talk about it primarily in the syndicate video that I'm going to release because cash is something that they generate and that they bring onto the board. But what you should know is that cash can let you perform an extra operation. But what you should know about cash is that you can steal it. It can be transferred from piece to piece. It can generate resources or bases if your faction's holding on to cash during a resource phase during the propaganda round. And also, if you have cash and just want to spend it in the moment when you're taking an action, you can do a little bit of an extra action because cash represents liquidating some resources to gain some tempo. So we're going to talk about that more in detail in the syndicate video, but you should know that when cash is discussed, the syndicate generates it. Anybody could theoretically take it and there are a few different ways to use it. Just a few other things to know about resources. You cannot go up past 49 resources. Anything generated beyond this point is lost. Although, I mean, I wish I could generate 49 resources. I'd never get rich in these games. So, your mileage may vary. The other way to get resources other than during the resources phase of the propaganda card round is to pass. So if you pass and you are an insurgent faction, you get 1 resource. If you're the government and you pass, you get 3. So sometimes passing is not all that bad. It gets you a little money to do your next operation with. And then I want to mention one more thing about how resources are spent. There are different costs for different operations, and we're going to talk about that very specifically in the faction videos I'm planning to make, where each faction's actions and why you would do them and where you can do them and what they cost are going to be covered. But everybody who's playing the game should know most things that cost resources cost 1 for the insurgent factions, or maybe 1 per location where they're doing something. It's more expensive for the government, and it changes for the government. So the insurgent factions have fairly consistent costs throughout the game. The government is going to have actions get more expensive as their alliance with the United States degrades. So the starting resource cost for various things for the government is 2. By the end of the game, it's probably going to be 4, unless you are doing really, really well. So the government is going to have the hardest time paying for stuff because their alliance with the United States can change as other players eat away at their board position. So how are you going to eat away at somebody's board position? I'm not going to go into the specific operations right now, but I do, again, want to talk over basic terms. So the actions you can take in this game are given specific names that kind of tell you how they fit with the other actions. So there's always the event. So whatever you do on the event card is the event. That's the text here if you take this card and play it that way. But most of what you're going to be doing is split up into operations, limited operations, and special activities. And those are the things that are listed here on the sequence of play as people who are eligible to take turns do so. So an operation is basically a full-size version of an action. Typically, it's going to be able to take place in multiple locations as long as you can pay for it. So let's say that I want to move, or I want to generate some troops, or I want to perform some attacks. I can do that in multiple locations if I'm doing a full operation. I just have to be able to pay for every space where that happens, or for every destination space I'm sending troops to, depending on the event that I'm playing. Meanwhile, a limited operation is called a limited operation because that typically means it can only happen in one place. So if I'm playing a full operation, I could maybe attack multiple places. If I'm doing a limited operation, I have to choose one destination for my troops to move to, one place to carry out an attack. And so it's limited geographically in terms of the places where I'm able to do it. Then we also have the term special activity. Honestly, this always cracks me up because it sounds like it's a classroom thing. Like, oh, all right, kids, it's time to do our special activity. These special activities are not cute, as you're about to find out, even if they sound it. And a special activity is basically a free action. There's one that you pay for, but we'll get there. You typically don't have to pay anything for them. So they're great because you can do something without spending resources. But a special activity is just a little extra thing that is usually paired with an operation. So a limited operation, no. An operation, you're going to get maybe a special activity. And the special activity is going to sometimes be limited by which operation you're performing. But it's like a free action that you can take before, during, or after the operation that you're carrying out. And so it's like a little extra oomph that you're giving to an operation that you're performing in the game. So those are the terms that are used to define the kinds of actions that you're doing. An operation is more full scale and can take place across multiple locations. A limited operation is location limited. You can just do it maybe in one place. And a special activity is like an extra cool free add-on to an operation. And the event is just what it says in the card. And then I also just want to talk one more time about control versus support, because those are things that can be related, but they don't necessarily have to be. So for example, you can control an area that doesn't support you. And there are also different criteria that determine control versus support. So control literally means that the faction that's in control has the most pieces in that area and is therefore physically in control of it. So for example, the Syndicate is in control of Pinar del Rio at the beginning of the game because there's one Syndicate token here and there's no other faction pieces from any other faction. So the Syndicate has a majority here and therefore they have control. Meanwhile, if you come here to La Habana, they are uncontrolled, and that is because no faction has the majority here. The Syndicate has one piece, And the 26th of July faction has 1 piece. And because nobody outnumbers anybody, that means that the area is uncontrolled. Meanwhile, here we have government control in these areas where there are clearly more government pieces. The Directorio controls Camagüey because they're the only one, they're the only game in town right now. And then you also have the 26th of July here in Sierra Maestra. And they are in control, obviously, here. So what's interesting is that control is determined by having more pieces than all of the other factions combined. So, for example, here in Las Villas, let's look at this situation where the government's clearly in control. If you put 2 26th of July guerrillas here, they're still in control. But if you put 1 more Directorio guerrilla in here, suddenly this area is uncontrolled because the government no longer has the majority of pieces total in this area, in this province. So when you're thinking about control, it literally means who has the most pieces. And as control changes, the actions that you can take in certain spaces begin to change as well. So be very attentive to who controls what. The other box that we have here has to do with support and opposition. So support basically just tells you what the people of a region are feeling right now in terms of this battle over Cuba. So if you are in a support area, that means that they support the government. They can do that passively or they can do it actively. And that support is going to affect resources. It's going to affect who can take actions in various areas, because if you're the Directorio, you can take actions in areas that are passive or neutral, but not active, for example. Whereas the 26th of July needs opposition spaces or maybe neutral ones to do what they need to do. But areas that support the government aren't going to help the 26th of July. And what's interesting is that support and opposition are not necessarily impacted by who controls a space. You can be in control of a space and not have the people on your side. Or you can be in the process of trying to take over a space, not have control, but you can like win some support or opposition from the people. So support is influenced by a number of types of actions within the game that we're going to talk about in detail faction by faction. But the government can perform civic actions, which will, push the people to the government side of things. And then the other factions can do things like terrorist attacks to drag opposition in the direction of their choosing. So as we go through the game, we're going to be fighting over control of these provinces and cities, but we're also going to be fighting for hearts and minds, sometimes in really gross and nefarious ways, and trying to manipulate the support and opposition in areas that we want to influence. And that is pretty much a full tour of the board. This box down here that says insurgent capabilities, there's certain capabilities and tokens that are going to come into play for the insurgents depending on the event cards that come up and are taken. There are also some cards in here that provide the government with momentum, which is like a special buffer up until the next propaganda round. So a lot of the game beyond this map is determined by what happens on the cards. But the board is already accounting for things that could happen in the future. So I think that is going to conclude my tour of the map and of special terms for the game. I think that we're now ready to talk about what you can actually do as the various factions in a game of Cuba Libre, and I'm super excited about that. So stay tuned for videos that are specifically about each faction and what they're able to do. There is some crossover, but I'm just going to teach each faction fully and separately because that's personally what I would want as a learner. And so I'm going to just give you the full tour, even if some of the insurgents share some actions. So keep an eye out for that on the playlist. And for now, hopefully this is helping you get situated in your future game of Cuba Libre, which you should absolutely be planning to play because this is a good one. So thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, stay tuned for more tutorial videos, and happy gaming, everybody.